Tonya Harry has been fighting for kids since the early 90s. First as a caseworker for CPS, working her way up to administration before finally changing careers to become the executive director for CASA of Deep East, Texas. We talk about the role of CASA in the life of a child in the foster care system, the experiences of working as an agent for Child Protective Services, and what people can do to help youth in these extreme circumstances. Tonya's life, like so many of the unordinary people I have met, revolves around service. In her case, service to children and teens in some of the most difficult experiences an adult could imagine. She is truly a remarkable person, and I hope you will come with me to meet Tonya Harry. Okay, I'm here with Tonya Harry. She's the executive director of CASA of Deep East, Texas, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I just thought she'd be an interesting person to talk to, let us all know what the mission of CASA is and stuff, and I'll let her introduce herself from here.
Thank you. I'm Tonya Harry. I'm the executive director here at CASA of Deep East, Texas. I've been with CASA since 2015. And prior to that, I worked for Child Protective Services. That's what I started doing pretty much out of college, so it's the late 90s, which kind of indicates my age. And I worked as a caseworker for 5 years, doing child abuse investigations, working with children in foster care and families. And then I became a supervisor for investigations of child abuse and stayed with the agency for 16 years and was a program director for investigations when I left. So very familiar with the northern end of Region 5 here. My counties reached from Nacogdoches all the way down to Trinity.
Okay. So what is CASA?
We are court-appointed special advocates. It's a national organization. We are under Texas CASA here in Nacogdoches. We have 3 counties that we serve, Nacogdoches being the largest. We serve Nacogdoches, Shelby County, and St. Augustine counties. And CASA is a guardian ad litem for children when they come into foster care. So if the state determines that a child needs to be removed from their home for safety issues, then they are appointed an attorney ad litem and a guardian ad litem, and a CASA serves as the guardian ad litem. And we represent their best interest in court.
Okay. So give kind of an example, because I kind of know just from my dad was on a jury for a case like that. But kind of give an example of like how y'all would represent a child in court, like their needs, I guess. Or...
Okay. Well, our job is to be a constant for the child, because a child that comes into the foster care system, they meet a lot of people. They see a lot of faces. As their case starts, they're working with an investigator. They may change caseworkers and work a family case. The state does try to keep families together, so they might offer in-home services first before children are removed. But if the situation gets so dire that a child needs to be, or a sibling group needs to be taken into protective custody, they are then placed in a foster home. And due to shortages in foster homes, most children are not placed in their county of origin. They're placed in another town. So if you have school-age children, they have to change schools, make new friends. They just arrived at the home of people that they don't know, and that's where they're going to stay. Lots of questions, not in any control of anything. And they're appointed a CASA, and that CASA stays the same. Even if they change caseworkers throughout the case, if they change foster homes, and they change schools, then their CASA is a person that will not change once they are appointed to the case. And we get to know them. We form relationships with the children. We are involved with their caregivers, with their teachers, if they're school age, anyone that's providing services to that child or sibling group. We get to know what the child needs. And we make sure that we express that in court, and that children's needs are being met while they're in their out-of-home placement. And then we help work on that permanency goal for them, because not all, but the majority of cases, when a child is taken into temporary custody, the state is hoping to reunite children with their parents. And the parents are given a certain amount of time to work some services and to control the safety issues that were in their home to begin with that caused the removal. So over time, we follow that progress of the parents as well, making recommendations as to whether or not children should remain in care for a little bit longer, or if it's time to reunite, or if it's time to look in another direction. So we prepare court reports and we go in front of the judge. We talk to the children when they're verbal and can understand what's going on. We do express their desires to the judge, but we also have to represent what's in their best interest. And so those are the recommendations that we make.
Yeah. So that you said at the end, where you're choosing between what the child wants and what's in their best interest, how do you, is there any set way where you make those decisions, or is it just...
It's a fact-based recommendation. It's no secret that most children want to go home, but it just may not be time. Maybe their parents need a little bit longer to work some services and to show stability with having a safe home and their ability to care for the children in a safe environment. And just give them a little bit more time before we would recommend that they return home. And they kind of ease into that. Maybe they start out with some unsupervised visits for the afternoon and then maybe a weekend and see how it goes. But we tell the children what we're going to recommend when they're old enough to understand, what we have to say. But we always let them know that we will express what their wishes are in court.
Yeah. So, and I would like to go back a little more because you talked about your work with Child Protective Services and stuff. So, how did you first get interested in that? Like, what's your origin story?
Well, my very first job out of college, I started just a little bit before I graduated, maybe 2 months before I graduated. I started working with the Nacogdoches Housing Authority, which is helping low-income families find subsidized housing. So I worked with a lot of families there, and I worked at a public housing unit for a while, and became involved with children and families there. And there was an incident that occurred that, as a citizen, all citizens are required to report any suspected child abuse, that I had to pick up the phone and make a report to Child Protective Services. And then it got me interested as I made this report as to what Child Protective Services does and how they work and how they help families. And I just felt like that would be something that would interest me. So I started watching for openings, and I applied for a job when they had an opening. And I think it was within maybe a month of making that report that I was hired with Child Protective Services.
Yeah.
And started out. I had no idea what I was getting into at the time, honestly. But if you are meant to do this kind of work, it will stick and you will stay. It is not easy. It's very long hours and long shifts sometimes, a lot of heartbreak. But if you believe in what you're doing and you put children and families first, then it just sticks and you stick with it.
Yeah. So what, because you said you were a caseworker and stuff, so...
Yes.
And then I think you said something more administrative later.
Yes.
So what was your job as a caseworker? What did that look like, if you don't mind me asking?
Not at all. It looked different every single day. You just never knew what to expect when I would show up at work. We would be assigned cases. I worked in a unit with about 5 other caseworkers, and we were what was called then a generic unit. It was before the agency specialized. So we worked all different types of cases. But if I was given an investigation, then I would go out. The law allows that you can speak to children about the report. And if there were, say it was a case of physical abuse. Maybe they had some injuries that were not consistent with their explanation. And you talk to the child to find out how they got their injuries. If there are any siblings, then you would talk to siblings and see if their stories lined up with the story of the child. And then you would approach the parents and talk to the parents about the report that was received. And you had very specific timelines in how you did this. And you documented everything. And when I started, we did not have any fancy equipment or technology. I think we wore pagers if we needed to be called back to the office, because we might be out in the county if there was an emergency call, because cases are classified 2 different ways. And I would leave, get my cases and get started and leave the office, and sometimes maybe not show back up until closing time or later. You didn't go home until kids were safe. So if you started a case at 4 in the afternoon and it turned into something that was concerning, then you had to resolve it before you could go home. You had to make sure that those children were safe before you went home.
So what did resolving it look like? Was it like calling police or getting them to like a different family member? Or
yes, like that. So maybe it would be a situation where we felt that everyone needed a little bit of time just to cool off. And it would be safer if the children went to stay maybe with a grandmother, aunt, uncle, someone. And we would ask the parents, they would have to voluntarily agree to that to let the children go home. And in very extreme circumstances, sometimes it might result in a removal, but that would have to be very significant safety issues, meaning loss of life or limb, the possibility that sexual abuse would occur if you left and it was going to occur that evening. Those kinds of situations where a child might have to be removed after hours.
Yeah. So you also mentioned how y'all didn't have like specific classifications before, and that you were just sent out to whatever.
Yes.
So obviously, from what you said, there's more specified stuff now. What's the different specifications, and how do you decide?
So investigations are the first people that make contact and that they start a case. And investigators have to determine whether or not abuse or neglect occurred, but they also are looking at safety issues and risk issues in the home. And if they feel that a family would benefit from services, that maybe the children should stay with a relative while the parents work on a few things and then come back home without taking custody of the children, if the parents are agreeable and willing to work those services. And so in-home services could be offered. I also worked those kinds of cases where we would pay for services for the parents, the children, if the children needed any services. And then if children were removed from their home, I also worked with the parents while they worked to try to get their children back. They have a plan of service through the state, and so they may be working on a number of different types of services at the same time in order to, we use the word risk a lot. We would say risk factors, to control those risk factors. We worked with a lot of families that maybe had some substance abuse issues, and so we would try to help the parents get into treatment of some sort and maintain sobriety before, and show that sobriety for a while before children could return home.
Yeah.
And then if they couldn't return home, maybe if that first option was not going according to plan, there was always a second plan in place for the children. So we might be looking at placement with relatives, if at all possible. Like to keep children with family when it's possible. And so if there are any appropriate relatives, the children could be placed there. Yeah.
So you go from a caseworker, you said you went into more administration and stuff, right?
I did.
How did your role change when you went into that? Were you less hands-on, I'm guessing, or?
Not as a supervisor. I spent 8.5 years as a supervisor, and I had Nacogdoches and Shelby County. So I supervised investigations. It was still generic when I first started, but then it switched pretty quick. And when they broke out into specialties, I decided to stay with investigations. So my role was to teach new caseworkers how to gain confidence in themselves, how to properly conduct an investigation, how to get comfortable with decision making in the field, and knowing when to contact their supervisor for additional input, and just being able to recognize those risk factors that are present in homes that could pose a serious threat to children. So, but I was always one to go out with caseworkers and not just stay in the office. So,
Yeah.
I would just jump in there with them in the trenches. So,
Yeah.
and then as I advanced to the next level, that did push me a little bit further away from hands-on. So,
Yeah. So, in working all this, I mean, I'm sure, like, especially, like, for me personally, like, anything involving kids and stuff, like, that really weighs on me, even when I just hear about it. I don't have to be connected to it at all. How do you deal with that? Like, because you're dealing with this on a daily basis for, I can't
over 20 years.
Yeah, over 20 years.
Over 20 years. I think that the biggest thing is do your best. Do everything according to the way that you're supposed to, so that you know that you did everything that you could for children to be safe. And do your best in working with families to try to offer services to them to help them make things better. And it took me a while to understand that I couldn't do the work for them. They had to show that they wanted to do the work on their own and to get their kids back. But we did take care of everything, and we did, as far as like, we paid for all the services. If they needed rides, we would give rides. We did a lot of extra stuff, going the extra mile to help parents get back on their feet, because sometimes that's really what it was. They had hit some sort of rock bottom, and their kids had been caught in the middle of that, which was really unfortunate. Sometimes there were very devastating cases that the state would offer services to the caseworkers after those cases were over, so that bring someone in to talk to us so that we could kind of decompress from that situation. It is important to have hobbies and to do things for yourself. And I always say a hobby that has a start and a finish, because in this type of work, it never ends. There's always a new case the next day. So it's good to have something where you have a sense of completion, because that's absent in your work life. You might finish a case, but again, there's another one. So those were important things to me. And I'm kind of a gym junkie. I like to have a walk in the evenings and do some exercise, and that was a good coping skill for me. And sometimes they were just rough cases, and I would go home and hold my kids a little bit tighter that night.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know you had kids either. I mean, that's got to really hit you pretty hard. So where do you see how did the switch to working with CASA come in? Was it?
Well, when I switched, when I was working for the state, I transitioned from supervisor to program director. And like I said, it's a little bit of a step. It's a step up, and then a little bit more removed from field work. And I was working with the supervisors of the units. So I didn't have a lot of direct work with the caseworkers. And I just had a lot of administrative duties. And the cases, if a case came across my desk, then it was a bad case. It was usually a child death or something very severe that I had to review. And if that's kind of your only duty, it does take a toll for sure. And I also expanded, and initially I had 13 counties when I became a program director, and they hired another program director for the center of Region 5. So I dropped down to 8. That's a lot of time on the road, and along with the administrative duties. And I was introduced to CASA. We didn't have a program here for a long time. So I worked with Child Protective Services before CASA started. And I was very glad when we got a CASA program here because I was so supportive of what they did and having just another set of eyes on children and another person. And was really pleased with the program and its progress here in Nacogdoches and in Shelby County and St. Augustine County, which were all counties that I was familiar with because I worked there. So the position came open in 2015, and I knew that dropping down to responsibility of 3 counties would be good, and I would be a little more local, have kind of a more set schedule, and be able to be home more often with my children, and my phone probably not ring all the time because you're not on call. So that is one thing. But I could continue doing work with children, and I could do it from a different perspective and still bring my knowledge from the state here. But also we have a different set of policies and procedures that we follow, and we are not bound by some of the same policies that the department is. So when we can make recommendations that maybe I couldn't make when I was a caseworker. I remember I can always remember going back to being a caseworker, and a lot of the kids that were on my caseload were teenagers that were in foster care and likely to stay in foster care until they aged out. And I just have a soft spot for scrappy teenagers that are trying to survive in the system, and knowing that I could play a hand in helping to help advocate for children that are in foster care and work from that angle to represent their best interests in court, and to work with volunteers from the community, people that come in and give of their time and their heart to work with children and to want to mentor them and be there for them. It was just an opportunity that I couldn't pass up.
Yeah. So what is, like, if somebody wants to get involved or maybe just even help out, what's the best way you would suggest of doing that?
Well, I would suggest that they talk to someone at their local program and just get an idea of exactly what the requirements are and make sure that it's something that they can commit to. Because our mission is important to us to be a constant for children, we do ask for a minimum of 12 months out of a volunteer when they come into the program. And we talk to them about what their duties would be as the CASA. If they are interested, they fill out an application, and they give us references to check. We run background checks because anyone working with children, they're required to go through FBI background check and a check with the central registry, making certain that there are no child abuse cases or anything like that on the record.
Seems kind of obvious.
Yes. So we do all those things, and we have a 30-hour training that we do. Part of it's in person, and part of it is self-paced that they do online. And at the end of their training, they are then sworn in as guardian ad litems. Our program, we have people, part of our interview process is for them to tell us what fits them best, like what age group they would like to work with. Would they mind working with a sibling group? Finding out exactly...
You're fine.
Okay.
Trust me.
So finding out exactly what they think would work best for them and why they think it would work best for them, and trying to match them to a case as we get cases. And those cases come in pretty regularly.
Yeah. So how many, like, children does, like, the average worker have at a time? Is it just, I mean, it can't just be one. There's enough, but, like, what are you looking at?
For a CASA volunteer, we actually start them with one case, and sometimes it is just one child. It might be a newborn that they are working for their best interest. Our more seasoned volunteers, as people get more involved and feel more comfortable, they might come and say, hey, I think I can take on a second case. And no one can work more than 4, and we have to get approval for someone to work 4 cases. And typically, those are our volunteers that have been with us, 10 years, 14 years, that are working the higher workloads. We do have a lot of retirees in our system, but we search for diversity within our program. You have a minimum age is 21 to be a CASA volunteer or to be a guardian ad litem. You can volunteer with the program and help in other ways if you want to, but 21 is the minimum age.
Yeah. So how many people do y'all have like working at a time, or like is it like a thing where you always need more?
Yes, guessing? We always need more. My goal for CASA is that we have CASAs waiting on cases and not children waiting on CASAs. We have, our staff does serve children if we don't have enough volunteers, but we're only allowed to serve so many. We are required to keep an 80% ratio. So we have to have 80% of our children served by volunteers. And if we can't meet that ratio, we have to stop accepting cases until we get to that point. And that means that there are children that don't have a CASA representative. And that breaks my heart. So I always want to be able to have a CASA waiting and ready to take on a new case when children come into care. Every child in care deserves a CASA.
Yeah. So, trying to think of a good way to kind of wrap it up. I guess, is there anything that, because I've done a lot of talking, I'd like you to say your own thing. Sure. Is there anything you want to just put out there about your experiences or working here or...
Well, I have to say that this work is very rewarding. And if anyone has been considering becoming a CASA, it's not an impulsive decision. They have to think about it because it is quite a commitment. That, wait for that right time. And when you know it's right, come in and sign up. It is so rewarding to get to be a part of these children's lives, even if it's for a short time. And for me, it's... when you build good relationships and when you treat people with kindness and courtesy and respect, you can continue those relationships even beyond involvement. And so I carry a case too because we just needed help at the time. And I said, I'll take a case. And so in working that case, it was a sibling group, and 2 of the children have reached permanency. And so they are no longer in foster care, but I still get to keep up with them. And I heard from them yesterday, as a matter of fact. And I can, I know how they're doing and how they're progressing in school because, I would wonder for sure how they were doing. And I can be a part of helping them visit their sibling that still remains in foster care. Which is really rewarding to see them get together and enjoy each other and have a good time because there's something, the sibling bond is great. It is, when children come into care, they're losing what's normal to them, even if it wasn't the best thing for them, even if it wasn't safe for them. That was their home, and it was what they knew. And so children that have been through abuse, that's traumatic. And then children that have to be taken from their homes, that's traumatic. And if there aren't enough foster placements out there and they have to be separated from their siblings, that's traumatic. So anyone that's been thinking of working with children, maybe as a CASA, maybe as a foster parent, they are needed, so needed. And I think some of the most rewarding things, and with social media now, people can find you, is having done this for as long as I have, kids that I worked with when they were 3, 4 years old, coming to find me when they were 18, 19 and had aged out of the system and just visiting with me for a little while. And the fact that they remembered me when I might not have, as a caseworker, I might not have been involved with them for a really long time. It would just be great to, catch up with them and that they thought enough of me to come and find me, to visit with me. So that's very meaningful. We have CASA volunteers that they've been to high school, college graduations. They keep up with the kids. So it isn't just a short-term thing. It can be lasting relationships. And it's so important for children to have a caring adult in their life. You can make such an impact on kids. Just one person that they can remember. And, having been through all the trainings and visited with people that are now public speakers, but grew up in a horrible situation, and then came out the victor, and they didn't allow it to define who they were, and they were able to move on and help other people. But just seeing the process work, they had someone that they connected with. Every one of them had an adult. Maybe it wasn't their CASA, maybe it was a foster parent, because even though it's a nationwide program, it isn't available everywhere.
Yeah.
And then, of course, some cities are so large, there are so many children in foster care that the CASA program can't serve them all. So I guess that would be one thing that I would say. Just encouraging people to get involved in some way if they feel that it is a calling for them. And it isn't for everyone. And we completely understand that. But there are other ways to help too.
Yeah. What would be some other ways, if you want to just throw that out?
Sure. I mean, it could be maybe they help organize a drive to get some supplies together for children that come into care. Most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time when I had to remove children as a caseworker, those kids came with the clothes on their back. And if you think about that, you drop them off at a foster home. If it's a brand new foster parent and they may have just been licensed and they weren't quite ready, they didn't have all the things, and all of a sudden they have 3 or 4 children in their home that just have the clothes on their back. So in helping get some things together, CPS, Child Protective Services, they have a rainbow room, which is stocked with emergency supplies for children and families, but caseworkers had access to that room, and it was important to keep it stocked with new underwear, new socks, toothbrushes, toothpaste, pajamas, extra sets of clothing. And, people can bring that here if they want it to go to those children. We're going to make sure that they get it to the children. Yeah. Hygiene products are a big thing that are always in need for children and teens, and, especially our teenagers in foster care. If you can imagine a teenager being taken into care and having to completely outfit a teenager as opposed to outfitting a 3-year-old, there's a big difference in the cost of doing that. And so organizing drives to help get those kinds of things together for children, maybe checking social media for agencies that are sponsoring children at Christmas or back to school. Those types of things, helping out there, signing up maybe to sponsor a child. Yeah,
just all those little things. Yes. I'm like, I'm sure nobody thinks about like, oh, we need to donate clothes for a teenager.
Yes,
I mean, I think, and I'm sure y'all get you got a pile of toys right there that were donated. I'm sure. Yes. Like people think of that kind of stuff, but it's true that not many people think like, oh, I need to donate clothes. Toothpaste, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
How important that really is.
Yes, I will say that I remember when working in the rainbow rooms when I would go to pull things for children, we did have a larger stock for small children than we did for teens. And so it's, and I have one adult child and one child that's a junior in high school. And so teenagers are expensive. And, just getting the very basic things. But if you can imagine, just think about what if you went somewhere, you traveled somewhere and your luggage got lost and you were stuck somewhere and you had to go out and buy just the basic stuff to get you by. You're looking at, a little dent in your wallet there to get yourself by. So these children could be in foster care for up to a year. And also kids grow. They outgrow their clothes really fast when they're really little, clothes and shoes. So sometimes we've had people do things like a shoe drive, which is great, and get shoes in all sizes, jackets, and of course hoodies are very popular with the teens. We had a local church reach out and say, what can we do? We wanted to do a coat drive, and I said, well, you know what? Teenagers will wear a hoodie when it's 12 degrees outside. That's what they want.
Yeah.
And so they got everyone a hoodie and more. I mean, we had tons of hoodies to be able to pass out to the teenagers in various colors, and that was fantastic. And there's some stuff behind you there. Those are hygiene bags that are for young ladies that come into care, making sure that they have everything that they need, because they might not be comfortable when they first get to their placement to ask for those things that they need. And so if they have a little bag of their own that they can pull from, that's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you for giving me this interview. I think it was really great, real informative, and something like you don't think about every day, But thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Anything you want to plug at the end, a website or anything y'all are working on right now?
Our website is www.casaofdet.com, and the DET is for Deep East Texas. Again, we serve Nacogdoches, Shelby, and San Augustine counties. But if anyone hears this and they live in different counties, but they're interested in becoming a CASA, they can just go online and look for a CASA program for their county, and it should pop up, and there would be a contact number. We are always welcoming people to come in the door, ask questions, and find out if this is for them. So, yeah, if you're thinking about doing it, none of the programs are in competition with each other. We want to see all the programs grow because we all want children to have a CASA. So
don't donate to them, donate to us, right?
Yeah, we make sure that it gets to where it needs to go and that all the kids are covered. So, So that's what I can think of. And there's even a national site that people can fill out an application there or just a form of interest. And those are routed to the local programs. So it's pretty easy to find someone.
Yeah. I'll link all those too.
Great.
In the
Great.
podcast. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Oh, hey there. Look at you made it to the end. You're a pretty unordinary person yourself. Most people don't do that. While you're here, why don't you like and subscribe or follow or whatever it is. And also we're on Instagram and Facebook. So you should probably go check those out too. Thanks for listening. You're pretty cool.